College. Before we get started, I'm going to introduce our interpreter, Sandra, and she's going to explain how to turn on the interpretation feature for Spanish-speaking families. If you want this presentation in English, you do not need to do anything at this time. Sandra, take it away. You are muted still, Sandra. There you go.
Hola, para las personas que quieran interpretación en español, por favor de presionar el icono que tiene como un globito para poder escuchar esta presentación en español.
All right, give me 1 second and I'm going to turn it on. Actually, I think, Ms. Duran, you might have that button. Do you see the interpretation button at the bottom, the little globe icon? Great, and you will put in Sandra's information.
Yeah, it should be good to go.
All right, excellent. Thank you for joining us this evening. My name is Miss Lowe. I'm one of the college counselors at Mountain View, and I am joined by the lovely Miss Duran. Miss Duran, can you introduce yourself, please?
Gracias por acompañarnos esta noche.
Sandra, I think I can hear you still. Did you?
Okay.
Okay.
Try again, Sandra?
Can you hear me now?
Still can hear you.
I have Sandra listed as the interpreter from English to Spanish.
And then Sandra, when you choose the channel, if you hit Spanish, does it turn you on to Spanish? Try saying something else, Sandra. Okay, I think she's good. Okay. Mr. Ann.
It's me. I'm Miss Duran. I work at Los Altos High School. It's a pleasure to be here tonight presenting to you all.
So when it comes to paying for college, the term that we use when it comes to paying for college is really financial aid. Financial aid is a wonderful umbrella term. So we're going to go over what financial aid is, what it consists of this evening. We're also going to talk about how to estimate your family's financial aid eligibility, what goes into that kind of equation when colleges are doing that. We're going to talk about the application process for financial aid, and also how the application results come to you, what they mean, where to go for help. Ms. Duran and I are experts on working with students and families about financial aid packages. We are not, however, accountants or CPAs. So when it comes to some very detailed financial planning questions, that is not what we're going to be focusing on for this evening. It's really going to be from the perspective of what is financial aid, how do our students pay for college, et cetera. So for the next 10 minutes or so, we're going to work through this little circle here, the different types of financial aid. So on that right-hand side is gift aid. So that's going to be our merit-based scholarships and need-based grants. That's the money that students don't have to pay back when they are given that money from colleges or organizations. That is the type of money that many families want, obviously, because you're using it for college and you do not have to pay it back. On the left-hand side, we have self-help aid, which is going to be loans or student employment. So loans is money that you borrow and you have to pay back for college. Student employment would be an on-campus job, but it would be money that would go directly into your student's bank account. It's often called a work study job. We'll cover more of that. When it comes to how colleges view financial aid, they view this full circle as financial aid. Many families, though, only really view financial aid as that gift aid on the right-hand side. But to colleges, they view all parts of this circle as financial aid or as helping out families. So let's start with the merit-based scholarships, right? One of the types of money that you do not have to pay back. Statistically speaking, where students can get the biggest chunk of money to pay for college for our students has been scholarship money directly from the future college or university that they attend. So that's why we're starting off with that type of scholarship, because it can be really big chunks of change. What makes it hard is that there are many colleges in the US. The process for applying for scholarships at these different colleges and universities looks different. So start with their website, start with those instructions for the financial aid website, not specifically the scholarship one, because financial aid can be many different types of money. So we want to start from that website for a school. You'll notice that at some colleges, you're automatically considered for scholarships when you apply as a student. Great, thumbs up. For other colleges, it's going to be a separate application. There's going to be a separate interview process. Sometimes you have to do an essay and an interview and an audition and a portfolio. It can really vary. Sometimes it's a separate process. Sometimes it's a separate deadline. And you always want to check when it comes to scholarships that you receive from a university, what the renewal requirements are. Some of them have very high GPA requirements. So you want to make sure that you're asking those questions if your student does receive a scholarship. And notice there at the bottom, when it comes to applying to merit-based aid or merit-based scholarships, you want to be aware if you have to follow need-based aid application rules. That's why we recommend looking at the financial aid website for a college, because you might have to fill out FAFSA or DREAM Act to get a merit-based scholarship. You wouldn't know unless you look at the full picture for a university. As I'm talking as well, sorry, another housekeeping item, please use the Q&A feature. We'll be referencing it throughout, so you don't have to wait until the end to ask questions. Here's a local example of a financial aid site for Santa Clara University, right? A private Jesuit school that is pretty close to us. You will notice that on this financial aid site, you do not see the word scholarship jump out at you anywhere. Where I would go as someone who spends a lot of time on these websites trying to help students figure out how to apply, I would probably first go to types of aid would be where I would go. And that is going to be where the scholarship link is. But it's giving you a full picture of a lot of different information about Santa Clara when it comes to how to pay for it. So it's just helpful to check out each school's website when a student is interested in applying there, if they're a senior or junior. Other merit-based scholarship categories to be aware of, private or community-based scholarships. So our community-based ones, we really like to recommend because the geography of our area limits the applicant pool and increases our students' chances of getting those scholarships. And they want to give our students scholarships. So that sounds pretty great to me. Where we post these opportunities are in a few different places. So that way students can access them. They're up to date. On our website for Mountain View and Los Altos, there's a subsite for the College and Career Centers. We post our hyper-local scholarships there. We also have newsletters and bulletins where we'll update some scholarships that our students have received in the past that maybe not be quite as local, but our students have received and are viable scholarships. And we also have a database in Naviance as well. Naviance is our website that we use for our students for planning for after Mountain View and after Los Altos, where these scholarships are also posted. So multiple places for a bunch of this information. When it comes to deadlines, colleges know, or our local scholarship organizations know, not colleges, that there are a lot of deadlines for college applications in the fall. So they do a lot of their deadlines in January through March, which is pretty great. The timelines kind of work out. These are going to be smaller chunks of money. It's going to be the main disadvantage to our really local scholarships because they are local organizations. They just don't have as much money to give out, but every little bit can help, and you can often stack scholarships. The procedure for applying for these scholarships can vary. So if you have a senior, it's really helpful for them to reach out and email if they have questions, or stop by the College and Career Center to ask questions about something that we've posted. And some of them are renewable, some of them are not. Renewable scholarships often have a lot more criteria. Sometimes you have to be a bit more competitive. And on the bottom there, those are some of our local partners that are really interested in helping out our students. I will also say it really helps that a student has community service in order to earn these scholarships. That is frequently a criteria because these are civic-minded organizations. All right, other scholarships. So the last kind of chunk or category of scholarships that you can think of, I would say would be national scholarships, which a lot of these databases that are hyperlinked in this slide here have. When it comes to these national scholarships or these databases where you create a profile and then it like sends you different scholarships to apply to, there are a few things to keep in mind. First of all, a student should really match the criteria for what the scholarship is looking for because they're hyper competitive to get. They should really spend their time wisely in selecting these scholarships because it can be a very time intensive process. For many of our students, they really only get to focus on the first two categories of scholarships, of applying to scholarships at their colleges and applying to the local ones. Oftentimes there isn't just enough time to do the national scholarships and do all of their work and be a person. It can also help to create your own separate email address for these scholarships in particular, because you can get a lot of spam. They can email you quite a bit. I really like in particular, Scholey and Going Merry are two that are linked there. When it comes to other things to know about these scholarships, also, keep in mind that a student should never be paying to apply for a scholarship and never be sharing their social security number for a scholarship. And with that, I believe we have Mr. Ann.
Yes, thank you. So I'm going to speak a bit more about need-based grants and scholarships. So this category is really about demonstrating that need for assistance, and the criteria for qualification can vary by program, but usually the way that they validate that demonstrated need is by completion of the FAFSA or the CADA. So that's the California Dream Act application. And those, as hopefully people are aware, are delayed this year, and we'll talk a bit more about the deadlines. But nobody has been able to fill those forms out for the 2024-2025 school year yet. So some of the sources of need-based grants or scholarships, the largest federal program is the federal Pell Grant program. Our California state largest program is the Cal Grant. But you can also see that different colleges and universities have their own programs. So for example, the University of California has a Blue and Gold program. The CSUs have EOP. There's a middle class scholarship, Chafee for foster youth. And then as Ms. Lowe mentioned, there's private and community-based scholarships. So the CCCs, we really try to specify in our communications if the opportunity is merit-based or need-based. And again, merit might be if your student is involved in activities, they have a certain GPA, but it's not really as concerned with the demonstrated financial need. Whereas the need-based scholarships really are expecting that a student can demonstrate need for that additional funding. Okay. So what exactly is financial need when we talk about this? Well, colleges use a formula and a calculation to determine what that is for each family. And it's really based on the family's financial strength. So the cost of attendance includes things that you would expect like tuition, fees, residential hall if a student's living on campus, a dining plan, again, if they're living on campus, but it also includes extras like transportation to and from campus, personal expenses, textbooks and course materials. And so that cost of attendance calculation can vary depending on a student's lifestyle or how far that they're traveling. So it's not an exact science, but the schools are using their own tools to calculate that. And then they're subtracting the calculated family contribution from the cost of attendance to determine what the demonstrated financial need is for each family. And I think an important point to pause on here is that there's a difference between demonstrated need from the college perspective and the perceived need from the family perspective. And both are valid, but there can be a difference. Your individual family might say, this is the actual amount of money that we need for you to attend this college or university, but the college's calculation doesn't exactly match that. And so that's where sometimes tough conversations need to happen, and it can be useful to use some of the tools that we're going to show in a few slides to get a sense of that before all of the excitement of decisions come in. So you have had a conversation as a family with what actually is, affordable. And then there's just going to be a name change. So starting in this upcoming cycle, the federal student aid formula will calculate a student aid index, or an SAI. And that term might be used interchangeably with family contribution. So that brings us to a tool, the net price calculator. This is a federal requirement that schools must provide this on their website. And the methodology varies by institution, but usually the modeling is based on a few questions, and some schools have more questions, which might be a bit more helpful, and some are pretty broad or general. And again, it's a need analysis based on those additional questions. And so if you were to type in Santa Clara University or go to that financial aid page, you would notice that there is a net price calculator button that was on the slide that we shared. So every school has a net price calculator. And then one of the other self-help of the pie chart are federal direct loans. And this is for a dependent student. And there are limits to how much money a student can take out for a loan. And you don't have to have those numbers memorized, but you can kind of see on the slide what it is now. So for a freshman who has only earned between 0 and 29 credits, they have a maximum amount of $5,500, and $3,500 can be subsidized. And so those subsidized loans are probably the first place that a student would want to go to because interest does not accrue on that, whereas the unsubsidized loans does accumulate interest, and the interest rate will vary. And so it's, again, something to consider and discuss as a family. And then also realizing that when you get a financial aid package, even if a loan is offered, a student does not have to accept the loan, and they can also discuss how much of the money that they would like to have distributed. So again, for the loan that does accrue interest, it's applied to the principal and it's repaid after the student finishes their education. And the standard is a 10-year repayment plan. This year, it was a 5.49% fixed interest rate. And it's a number that's set every June based on a T-bill sale. And then students have a weighted average of the 4 fixed interest rates when it comes back to repayment. So again, not a financial expert, but there are repayment programs. So there can be income-based repayment plans. If a student goes into public service, there are loan forgiveness plans. And then there are also payment plans over time. So it really is something that when you get to this point in the process, you can talk to us. You definitely want to talk to the financial aid office of the school your student's considering attending and thinking through this large investment. And then this is just another slide sort of talking about some options. So parents have the Federal Plus loan. There are other private loans that you might qualify for, and then payment plans. So schools don't always ask families to write one check for the whole year. You can pay by month or you can pay by term. And usually these colleges are happy to work with families on creating a payment plan that works for them. And it is important to look closely at that financial aid package after a student is admitted to make the most informed decision. And then again, building that relationship with the financial aid office of that school, because you'll be working with them over the next several years. Okay. And then another part of the pie chart is student employment, and that's another part of self-help aid. So one of the programs that might be offered in the financial aid package is work study. And it can be it is funded by the federal, state, or institution, and it is delivered as a paycheck to the student for hours that they've worked. And so sometimes on a campus, they will have a list of work study jobs, and students that have work study as part of their financial aid package can have priority in filling those positions. If enough work study students don't fill those positions, sometimes it is opened up to students that don't qualify for work study. So even if a certain student doesn't have work study, it doesn't mean they can't get an on-campus job. They just might not have sort of first dibs or priority on it. And of course, students can work off campus without it being officially work study. But the key thing here, when you see that on your financial aid package, is the student actually has to work those hours and then they are paid for the work. It's not automatically applied to their student account. And then we have some research, but it's a little bit hard to exactly pin down. The point is that there is some studies that show that students that work about 10 to 15 hours a week during college have a better academic outcome than students that do not have a job. But if students work too many hours during the school year, there's also a negative impact on their academic performance. So it is important for students who are considering work study as a key component of funding their education, that they don't overestimate how many hours they can or should be working, because it can have a negative impact on their academic performance. Okay, and I believe this is back to Ms. Lowe.
All right, so let's touch on FAFSA and DREAM Act. What is FAFSA and DREAM Act? So this is providing access to our need-based financial aid that Ms. Duran was discussing. FAFSA stands for Free Application for Federal Student Aid. Students who are completing a FAFSA are going to be our U.S. citizens or permanent residents, aka green card holders. For students who are undocumented or former DACA students, those students are going to be completing what's called the DREAM Act, and the acronym for it is CATA. So when you see on our slides, FAFSA or DREAM Act, FAFSA or CATA, they're pretty much interchangeable forms from our perspective. Yes, they are separate sites, but they are free forms for our students to complete. They just fill out one or the other based on their citizenship status. And it is giving students access to many similar pools of money. FAFSA is going to be giving access to those federal funds. So that is going to be the main difference, and California funds. So FAFSA is going to be used for those loans, and the Pell Grant, that is often a grant that families are very curious about if they've qualified for or not. When it comes to getting access to Cal Grant, the application for Cal Grant is also FAFSA or DREAM Act. DREAM Act also gives families money, access to financial aid for any accredited university within the state of California, pretty much. But you have to fill out one of these applications in order to get access to many different types of need-based financial aid. And I said at the beginning that there are going to be some colleges, some institutions where they require families to fill out FAFSA in order to access merit-based scholarships. So also just be aware of that. Looking at the state of Oregon, seems like universities in Oregon, this happens a lot for. All right, other things to know that are important about FAFSA or CATA. It is free to fill out these applications. Excellent. They're online. Excellent. You have to fill it out each year that you're in college as a student, or you have to fill it out each year for your student if you're a parent, because income can change from year to year. Siblings each have their own separate FAFSA if you have more than one student in college. Now it is the case that you can list up to 20 colleges on FAFSA at a time. When you hit submit, it sends off your FAFSA or your DREAM Act to those 20 colleges. And something that you can always go back and edit is going to be adding or removing colleges on those forms. That's always something that you can go back and edit. So let's say you're a senior right now, you don't know where you want to go to college. That's totally fine. Or you applied to many colleges. You can go back and you can remove some that you had from your first 20 to get some of the other schools that you learned about later on there. You can also make corrections to FAFSA online or DREAM Act online. You only want to make corrections if you've been prompted to, or if you are making a correction, try not to do too many corrections because it will lock the form. It does have some safeguards in that way, but you can make a correction if you need to, or if the form prompts you to. And when it comes to, can I have like a list of deadlines to know when I have to do this? We can't actually give you deadlines for FAFSA or DREAM Act, unfortunately, because each college and university has their own set of deadlines. So we can't quite give you a set. One good deadline to know about is April 2nd. That is the Cal Grant deadline for students, but try to get it done before then. But April 2nd is an important deadline to know about for our students. Other important things to know about FAFSA or CATA. For our current set of seniors, they are going to be filling out the 2024-2025 FAFSA. It has not become available yet because we've mentioned that there have been some changes. There are a lot of changes. I'm going to talk about that in a few more slides. That FAFSA will be available, supposedly, according to the government, you know, what they say. We're crossing our fingers that what they say is true. They say it's going to be available on December 31st. So your student isn't behind. They haven't been able to fill it out. In fact, it's just not available for them to complete it. When it comes to who is completing FAFSA, the term that it's now using is it's referring to each student and each parent as a contributor. So when you're filling out your portion of the FAFSA as a student, you're a contributor, or as a parent. In order to be a contributor onto FAFSA, you have to create your own federal student ID or FSA student ID. This is just creating an online account using your social security number, or if you're a parent that doesn't have a social security number, you can also create one. Your student just needs to have one. Every parent and every student, so all the contributors, need to have their own FSA ID. What happens is that if a student contributor starts their FAFSA or starts their FSA ID, they can then invite their parent to be a contributor onto their FAFSA, or vice versa, right? A parent can start by creating their FSA ID, starting FAFSA, and they can invite their student to join. The sections this year are going to be more separate than in the past. I believe I touch on that more in a few more slides. Speaking of inviting parents to FAFSA, who is a parent according to FAFSA or according to the DREAM Act? There are some changes around this from the past, but this is the same. According to these forms, only biological or adoptive parents are parents on FAFSA or DREAM Act. If you are a student who is living with a grandparent or an aunt or an uncle or an older sibling, and Mountain View recognizes them as your guardian, that is not relevant to FAFSA or the DREAM Act. It has to be an adoptive parent, or it has to be a biological parent according to this form. So if you have more questions, please come and talk to us in the College and Career Center. We would love to help. As I mentioned, right, when a student is filling out FAFSA, they get to invite their parent to complete the form. If you have divorced parents, what happens is there's a tool now that is new that is called the Parent Wizard. When you are completing the Parent Wizard, if your parents are divorced or separated, it is going to ask you questions to determine which parent contributes more financially to the student, and that divorced parent is going to be the parent invited to complete FAFSA. This is different than in the past. It used to be the case that the parent who a student lived with 50% or more of the year was the parent who was listed on FAFSA. That is no longer the case. There's now a tool called the Parent Wizard, where one of the divorced parents gets invited to complete FAFSA if they contribute more financially to the student. If that divorced parent who contributes more financially to the student is remarried, that remarried step-parent will then also have to be a contributor on a student's FAFSA. Okay. Do know that while FAFSA only wants the information from one divorced parent or separated couple, there are going to be particular colleges that use other forms that will want the information from both biological parents. So if a college requires only FAFSA, they're only going to want the information from a parent that's determined by the Parent Wizard. This is kind of a big change for them. Other things to know about for how FAFSA or CATA puts together your information, like the financial factors that these forms are using. These are the factors that it's using in order to put together what was formerly an EFC, which is now a student aid index or an SAI. These are the factors that the form is looking at. Your wages as a parent from 2022, your students' wages from 2022, federal income taxes paid, family size, and assets. Notice that none of these bullet points are the number of students in college. That is no longer part of the formula. Only these factors are now part of the formula. Notice that for assets, what it's listing as part of the SAI. So a cash savings checking, okay. Investments, there are many things that can be in investments. Something that is shielded from investments are retirement accounts. They are not including IRAs, 401ks, 403bs, other retirement accounts within that investment piece as part of the SAI formula. For real estate equity, they are also not including the equity of your primary residence. If you own a secondary residence, that would be included. They also now are doing equity in all businesses and farms. So if you own even a small business with 4 employees, that gets included, and so does child support received from 2022. Okay, those are the factors going into that SAI formula. So as we've mentioned, FAFSA for our current class of seniors will not be available until December 31st. This is part of legislation for FAFSA simplification for our students. So hopefully in many ways, right, cross your fingers, it is going to be an easier form. It is now, instead of over 100 questions, down to 36. I've heard 38 questions as well, so it should be quite a bit shorter. We've mentioned that expected family contribution, or EFC, is now called an SAI. And in fact, an SAI can be a negative number if a family's income is at that level, that low. EFC could only be 0. You can never get lower than 0 for EFC. As I mentioned, the FAFSA formula does not account for the number of students currently in college at the same time. The parent wizard piece for divorced parents is different from how it was before. Before it was also that rule of who the student lived with most. That rule is now gone. When it comes to being a contributor on FAFSA, it used to be that only one parent needed an FSA ID. Now both parents need to have an FSA ID to be contributors on the form. And also as well, it used to be that you could opt in to use what was once called the data retrieval tool from the IRS. Now it is mandatory to import your tax information from the IRS. You have to use a tool called the Direct Data Exchange. You have to import that information and consent to it. And if you do not, your student will not be eligible to receive financial aid. They will not be eligible for Cal Grant. Okay. All right. The CSS, or financial aid profile form. So I mentioned a few slides ago that there are some colleges that will want information from both parents, even if they're divorced. Often it is going to be one of these schools that requires what's called the CSS profile. So this financial aid form is used by about 400 colleges. Most of them are private, but there are some out-of-state public colleges that do require this form. It is a financial form that's created by College Board, so it does cost money to fill out because, you know, College Board. And colleges use this form because they have more discretion over their endowments about how they give out financial aid. So they can get a more full financial picture from your family if you want financial aid, and they can choose who to give it to more. And when it comes to these deadlines for when it's due, once again, it can also really vary. For some of our students who have applied early decision or early action, I wouldn't be surprised if some families have already had to complete the CSS profile in order to get financial aid. Other things to know about what goes into the CSS profile formula, similar to how, like what goes into that SAI formula for FAFSA, they are looking at different things. They do want the equity of your primary residence. They do, while they don't include it in the formula, your retirement accounts, they use it as a contextual piece of information. So it shouldn't raise the price of what your family is paying, but it's something that they're aware of. The value of 529 savings accounts is in there, which for FAFSA, they actually haven't shared how 529s are going to be taken into account completely yet. So we actually have to just come back to that one. They will take into account medical expenses. If your younger students are attending elementary or a secondary school where you're paying tuition, they want 3 years of income. So they want what you made for 2022 for our seniors. They want what you made for 2022, what you think you're probably going to make for 2023, because we're almost at the end, and then what you predict that you'll make for 2024. And then they do consider the number of kids in college for the CSS profile. That last bullet point, special circumstances, any college, not just the 400 colleges that require CSS profile for financial aid, any college can take into account special circumstances when it comes to your family's finances for things that might not be captured in the financial aid applications that you're completing. What's important to do when it comes to accounting for special circumstances in order to hopefully get more money to help your student pay for their education. What's important is that you do 2 steps. Step 1, when you are applying for financial aid, you clearly put together an email. Maybe they have a form for special circumstances available on their website that lists different circumstances with specific numbers of because of the fire that happened in such and such year, this was an expense that my family had to pay that was not accounted for anywhere in the forms. Or we have this reoccurring expense for a family member because of XYZ, being specific and clear and explicit in those forms, and sharing it with the office when your student is applying for financial aid. And step 2 would be that when your student actually gets their financial aid package, when they've been admitted and they actually see how much they're being asked to pay. Step 2 would be that if you feel that the financial aid package that your student has received does not account for these circumstances, that you then reach back out to that office and you say, hi, thank you so much for the financial aid package we've received. I just wanted to confirm that you also received the form about our special circumstances. And if you did, is there any other information that I can give you that can provide more insight about the financial situation for our family to make it as affordable as possible for my student because they love your school? So those would be the 2 steps for any school for special circumstances. Some schools can take it into account. Financial aid officers only have so much discretion over what they can and cannot do. And some schools might not be able to because of the rules that they have to follow. And now back to Mr. Ann.
All right. So after applying for financial aid, and I know we have possibly some 11th grade or younger families on the call, so this might be a particular section to cue in on here. So we're going to walk through some next steps. Okay. So after a student submits their FAFSA, we anticipate that they're going to be somehow able to view the report. It might get emailed to them. They might be able to log in and see it, but they're going to be seeing a submission summary or an FSS. And it's important that your student actually reviews that for accuracy. And at this point, it might show if the student is going to qualify for a Pell Grant, that largest federal program for aid. And even more useful than that are the financial aid packages from each college that a student has applied to and admitted to. And usually private colleges provide this around the time of admission within a week or 2. Usually it happens pretty quickly. Unfortunately, sometimes the public colleges can lag a little bit. And so you might not get your financial aid package right after you hear that you've been admitted. So there can be a little bit of time in between there. And again, this is just a review of the 4 different parts of the pie chart for the financial aid package. And as Ms. Lowe mentioned, we want one section to be larger than another, but it's the components of all 4 of these that make up the complete picture of what a student will be offered to help them afford attending the college of their choice. And so here is what it could look like. So it could be that in the bottom left corner, you can see that This pie chart shows that a large percentage of the funding is going to be coming from loans. So 75% loans and then 25% scholarships. And then in the upper right-hand corner, you can see that it could look like 50% of the financing is through student employment, 25% is going to be covered by loans, and then 25% could be covered by grants. And this is where you're going to see a lot of variation, student to student and family to family. And so it is, and even school by school in some cases. So it's just really important to compare each financial aid package and look to see what that really means for the student and the family. Okay, so we've talked a lot about how you can work through this process, but we think it's really important for families to be aware of tools that you might have when making this decision around value, return on investment, what are some averages, so that you're making an informed decision. It's a very emotional decision, so I think the more data that you can use can be helpful in the conversation. And so the federal government created the College Scorecard, and it's part of the U.S. Department of Education. And it's a website that really informs students and parents about various institutions when they're making this huge decision about the investment of time and financial resources. And so one really cool thing about this College Scorecard website is that you're able to stack colleges side by side and get a quick view. And it will show things like average annual cost, what are the median earnings for students who have graduated from the institution, and then also shows information about cost by income bracket of the family, which I think is really cool. And we'll go to the next slide and show you that. So if you were to click into it, and we're using Northeastern University, a private college in Boston, as the example, you can find sort of your family's income off to the right and get a sense of how much on average would this cost depending on your income bracket, which is pretty cool. Yep. And then another tool that we wanted to point out that you might be interested in is My Intuition, which is a quick college cost estimator. And this tool asks a few questions. It's an easy way to get started. You can record the results of what the predictive outcomes are, and then start having that conversation as a family again before your student is admitted, and just saying, like, you know, what would we want to do in this scenario or that scenario? So that way it just tamps down some of the stress or the pressure before students have a limited amount of time to make that decision, which is May 1st, on where they want to deposit. It's not used by every school, My Intuition. It's used by about 70. And we picked sort of a selection of schools that are popular with MVLA students, just so that families right now can get a sense of which schools are using this tool. And if any of those schools have come up in conversations at home, it might be worth looking at myintuition.org. And then some of these colleges are also saying, like, you know, save that picture because it might help in a conversation with us. Okay, so what are your action items? What is your to-do list? We just dropped a link in the chat with where families or individual contributors can set up the FSA ID. It is important that people use a unique email and a unique cell phone number, because, like, you know, duranfamily@att.net, it will only work for one person. You can't have multiple people use a shared email account. And it can take 1 to 3 days, possibly a bit longer, for the government to verify the account. So that's why we really want people doing this now. So that way we know that the accounts are up and running when that form goes live at the end of December. We're going to have some Cash for College workshops in January to help families with that. But if people create their FSA IDs in January when they're at the workshop, they might not be able to complete the form. So it is everyone's doing a very big push to have FSA IDs created now, so you're prepared when the form opens. Another action item is start exploring these net price calculators, use the myintuition.org, compare and contrast using the College Scorecard. Again, so that way these conversations have already happened before decisions come back, and you and your family have time to really digest and think about it before maybe rushing into a major decision. And then just researching aid at the colleges of interest. So for seniors, definitely, but younger students as well. Like, this is a really good opportunity to see what schools are known to give large merit scholarships, what schools are 100% need-based, what schools do not include loans as part of their financial aid package. So there are schools that don't use loans whatsoever. So if you're admitted to that school, you will not have to take out loans, they'll cover you. And it just really depends on the school and your priorities. But it does require a little bit of research. And in the College and Career Center, we're happy to help you identify those schools. And then just really looking through the correspondence that we're sending out about merit scholarships, need-based opportunities, using Naviance, coming to talk to us about it, and then reading the fine details. We know that when students apply to college, they get a ton, or even before they apply, they get a ton of emails from schools. But it is really important that your student stays on top of reading those emails, because sometimes it can be kind of buried and they might miss a really important opportunity with a short deadline if they're not reading closely. And so setting aside time each week, maybe to just clean out email, check those portals, and then completing applications before the deadline, because these schools, they often don't have a lot of flexibility with the money stuff. So you got to get it in, or the housing. So make sure you're beating the deadlines on all of this. Okay, so we've completed the presentation. People have been doing a wonderful job in the Q&A. If there are additional questions, please drop them now. Otherwise, we just want to really thank you for taking time out of your evening to listen to the presentation. We really want to empower families to have as much information as possible and a starting point. We know this is a complicated, multi-step endeavor. Ms. Lowe, do you have anything that you'd like to add?
If you have any questions, speak now or forever hold your peace. And as we've mentioned throughout this presentation, Ms. Duran and I are very open to questions just to help you and your student. We really want to help our families. So our emails are our first and last name followed. So heather.lowe@mbla.net. I think we'll drop this in the chat too. And laura.duran@mbla.net. We'll give you a few more minutes to ask questions. And then if there's nothing else, we're going to wrap it up. But I'm answering a question in the chat. Was there any, I had one kind of good question that I saw in the chat that I can answer out loud. That was pretty good. Was there any questions that you wanted to answer out loud, Ms. Duran?
Yeah, let me address, I see a couple things coming through in the Q&A. One question is the FSA ID should be in the student's name. So it is really important that each individual person create their own FSA ID so that there's no confusion. So if your student is completing their own FSA ID, they'd be entering themselves as they'll say like, I'm a student, and what's their, full legal name, never using nicknames, and then putting in that information. And then as a parent, or guardian, you would be putting in your information as a parent guardian. And then once your student starts completing their form, they're going to invite you using the email that you use to create your account. And then it's going to sync up. You'll accept that invitation. So each individual is creating their own FSA ID. And then eventually when the form opens, your student is going to be inviting you to be a contributor to their form. So you create your FSA ID, they create their FSA ID, and then eventually those two things will match, but for now it's separate. And then there are a few really great questions about, who is the contributor. I would love to direct you to this great, there's a YouTube playlist that the federal government has created surrounding all of these better FAFSA changes. And I dropped it in the chat. But if you click on that link, it will show one video, which is forms I need to collect before filling out the form. But you can also watch really short videos on who's my contributor or what are the changes that are being made. And so it might be worth just spending a few minutes watching those videos, because I think they're pretty informative and they're short. So I would refer to that.
Or do colleges take 529 funds into account when looking at aid and scholarships? So as I mentioned briefly, for colleges that are using FAFSA for financial aid only and not CSS profile, for colleges that use that form, right now the jury is out into how that is being included in the calculation when it comes to who's like the benefactor of a 529 plan. For colleges that use CSS profile, they are taking it into account when they're looking at aid. If they use CSS profile for merit-based scholarships than they would be. If a 529 plan is owned by a grandparent, then that would be the exception to those rules. 529 plans owned by a grandparent or by another person outside of the immediate family, but the benefactor is the student, would be excluded. Another question that I wanted to answer that was asked previously that I thought was a really good question was, do colleges like require like FAFSA and CSS profile, or like CSS profile only? I can't think of a single college that will only want CSS profile. It's either going to be just FAFSA or CATA, or FAFSA, CATA, and CSS profile. Financial aid is so weird this year because of the delays in FAFSA, though, that I can never say the word never. But that would be very uncommon, or it would be for our international students. Ms. Duran, do you want to take another one?
Okay, let's see here. There's a question about scholarships and what ones MVLA students have had a fair chance of getting in the recent past. So the hyperlocal scholarships that Ms. Lowe and I are sending out to students, such as the Mountain View or Los Altos Rotary Club, the Kiwanis Club, the MVLA Scholars, these hyperlocal scholarships that are based on our regional area, those have very high likelihood that our students will get them. Some can be more competitive and some are need-based or merit-based, but we're really using Naviance as our tool to share the ones that we think are likely or hopefully likely beyond those hyper-local scholarships. So we specifically call out the local scholarships and we send those out, but then we also have Naviance database to kind of help students look a little bit broader than that, but more likely. And then there are those big databases that we also share, which, as we've addressed, you need to be a discerning consumer of, because some can be really spammy. There's no way that we can filter all of those. So it's more just like empowering students and families to say, if you want to open this, can of worms or Pandora's box, like that's fine, but maybe create a separate email, because they could be funding based on selling your information. Yeah.
And right, statistically, for students, getting the biggest chunks of money is going to be from scholarships from the colleges themselves, not from Scoli or the Coca-Cola scholarship or the left-handed scholarship. It's going to be those big chunks of change from colleges. Another parent was asking about Canadian colleges. So when it comes to financial aid at international schools, the only type of financial aid that can be used abroad is going to be loans. That's all that is going to be available. Cal Grant would not go outside of the country. The process for applying for international, for applying for financial aid at international colleges is going to look different depending on the country. If your student is a dual citizen as well, it can really vary, but mostly the funding that would be available to the student would be specific scholarships. I know University of Toronto has quite a few that a student would apply to and undergo that scholarship application process at those specific Canadian schools.
Yeah, absolutely. So another question, scheduling an appointment to discuss special circumstances. So you can always make an appointment with one of the college and career staff members to talk through like paying for college, but we're going to just be giving some more broad, like general advice and pointing you at some of these tools. But if you're wanting to discuss special circumstances, it might end up being with the college or university, because those are the people that are going to really need to know what those circumstances are. We have no control over, the financial aid package. We just help direct students to scholarships and making sort of informed decisions based on what they receive. So depending on what that specific special circumstance is, it could be us, but it might end up being the schools that your student has applied to. And then last one, I think, so parents are married and filing taxes jointly. I think you could start with one parent creating the FSA ID, and then through that wizard feature, and once you get into the document, it will say if the second person needs to contribute. No,
so both parents have to have an FSA ID for the changes for FAFSA this year. So even if you file jointly, right, every contributor needs their own FSA ID. That is a departure from what it used to be last year. Yeah.
Even I am still trying to internalize all of the changes. So yes, thank you. Thank you, Ms. Lowe. Everyone creates an FSA ID.
Everyone, it's like Oprah. Everyone gets an FSA ID.
Okay, good. I love it. Well, I think that's all of the questions.
Yeah, great. Okay. Wonderful.
Everyone.
And with that, thank you so much for your time this evening. And we hope to hear from you soon or see your student in the College and Career Centers at MBLA.
Good night.